You love her voice, you love her looks. What Melissa loves are comic books. Hi, welcome back. So, if you've watched any of my videos so far, you might have been clued into the fact that they're all in chronological order so far, telling the narrative history of the creation of comic books as we know them today. So, today's going to be different. I have, thanks to Ken Kirby and the free raffle that he's been holding on the Golden Age Comic Books Facebook group, I have my very first Golden Age comic book. So to date, I've only been able to talk about reprints that I own or online scans of Golden Age comic books, but now I actually have in my hand my very first Golden Age comic book. This is Feature Comics number 50 from 1941. So we're going to review this today now. I'm not going to just open it up and flip it for you to see because this is pretty brittle. The cover is not even on. So I'm going to sit this in front of me and then I'll just show you the scanned pages that others have done from this issue so that you can read along. So I'm opening it up right now and I'm seeing the ad in the inside front cover. And then the first story is Doll Man. Of course, this is the big success from Quality so far. Dollman is a really weird character where his shrinking skill makes no sense at all, but there's some gorgeous art in here. You're seeing some Reed Crandall artwork here, even though it says William Irwin Maxwell. That's just a like a house name. And right now he is going to an island, and he's going there with his girlfriend and his girlfriend's um, father. And this is already a cliche, right, in the superhero genre. When we get to Spy Smasher, we're going to see that father and daughter are frequent co-stars in comic books. We're going to see that in Sandman, and we're seeing that in Dollman. And I don't think at this point they know that he's Dollman, although I think it's kind of obvious. And there's a moment here that's going to be coming up when he is telling them to get on a plane, and Daryl, is just going to stay behind an island to wrap something up, and they're just okay with that. And you think that the girlfriend would be a little bit more concerned unless she knows that he's actually Dollman. So I think that they know that he's Dollman, even if he doesn't know that they know. Anyways, moving back to his goofy powers. So he can shrink, and his thing is that he can punch with a full grown man's strength because he's got the mass of a full grown man, but he doesn't have the weight of a full grown man because he can also stand on top of someone's hat without them sensing that there's a lot of weight on top of their head. So that's kind of weird, right? Um, unless he's got some kind of gravity manipulation powers that we just never hear about, which kind of makes sense because he also has this super leaping ability, which makes a lot more sense if he has this gravity control as well. So I think that he's got a lot of powers going on. He also has this power that's never explained where when he shrinks, he gets his costume on, and then when he's full size, his costume disappears and he's wearing his normal clothes again. So I have no idea how to explain that one. That's not gravity. That's not shrinking. Maybe that's some. Anyways, real quick about the plot. So there's an American on this island, and he was a traitor working with these enemy agents, but he's changed sides on his deathbed, and that is all that Dollman needs to justify killing all the enemy agents. Now, keep in mind this is 1941. This issue came out in September 1941. It was still on sale into November 1941, but should have been pulled and replaced before Pearl Harbor. So there's really no legal justification for the rampant murder that Dollman's doing, but it's a comic book. You're not supposed to think about it. Just look at the gorgeous artwork. In fact, that's pretty much the rule for any Dollman story. Just don't read it. Look at the artwork. Be happy. Next up is Big Top. This is gag filler. There is a page about how you don't get too far in the circus, and that kind of makes sense. And then there's another page about a character named Herculo who's got like Superman level super strength. and then he's just this dumb guy in the circus, and hopefully that's not what would really happen to a Superman in real life, but you never know. And then we've got, I just heard, so the pages are really brittle. Even turning it as careful as I could, I just heard a little crunch noise in the corner. So I'm not going to be able to read this too often. This may be the last time I open this for a while. Next up is Samar, and this is one of those jungle Tarzan clones. And you know that the jungle genre is just rife with racism, so this is going to be no exception. In fact, this is a particularly bad one. So Samar is on the side of this white plantation owner who has slaves, and he thinks that the slave owner is the good guy because he takes good care of the slaves. And this bad guy is trying to rile up the slaves and convince them to fight for their freedom, because you know they should be free or something. Goofy notions like that. So, anyways, Samar beats some up, and then the witch doctor, because of course there's a witch doctor. The witch doctor says that he's going to put the curse of the death devil on Samar, and Samar says, "Oh yeah, well I can sick lions on you." And so lions start mauling all the blacks, and then at the end, the surviving blacks say, "All right, we give up. We'll go work for our master." And Samar says, "Well, I just did a good job." And that's that. So that's Samar. Next up is Zero Ghost Detective. And I was actually really excited about this one because I love Dr. Occult. And I thought, oh, this is like a Dr. Occult character. Well, it's kind of a Dr. Occult character. There's a cult, there's a detective, and that's pretty much it. So, Zero, which is a terrible name for a hero, by the way. Just think about that. How many wins have you had? Well, I call myself Zero. What does that tell you? And this story is no exception. Okay, so there's this ghost or a wraith or a ghoul. He's called all three in this story, and he appears at the scene of a murder. And then later, when Zero tracks down the bad guy but has no luck in catching the bad guy, the ghost shows up and pushes him out a window, and then reveals what happened so that Zero knows, because Zero hasn't really done anything up to this point except be present. And so he gets to. Next up is Dusty Dane. This is a South Seas adventure with Dusty Dane and his sidekick partner, whose name is Big Mike Cardigan, who doesn't wear a cardigan. That's interesting. Anyways, this is by Vernon Henkel. I think Vernon Henkel is one of the better writer-artists that comes out of the Iger Eisner studio. And yeah, I think he's got a good sense for pacing for these short features, and then and the art is pretty fair. And bear in mind, I was really hard on Zero, but these are very short features after Doll Man. A lot of these have just 5 pages to work with, and you really can't tell a decent story in 5 pages. So Zero hurts for that. Dusty Dane also has a problem with it due to the short length. He is on a ship. The two of them are going to take this, be on this boat going from the South Seas all the way to England. Except that the first officer, he has acted suspicious in front of them. So they follow him to shore, and it turns out that he really is suspicious. He wants to sell out the crew, and then they're going to take all the cargo. So our two heroes try to fight the bad guys, but then the Australian police show up and they arrest Dusty and Mike, and they wind up in jail. And that would be the end of the story, except that we need something to happen to get them out. So by some amazing bit of plot shenanigans, the bad guys decide that they're going to do them a favor, and after they leave, they tell the police that after they leave, they can let them out, which is not what bad guys normally do, but it does give Dusty and Mike the chance to get on a bomber plane that you just happen to gain access to. I don't know how that really happens. It kind of happens between panels. And then they bomb the ship that's coming to raid the ship that they were going to be on. And that's that story. So that's not great, but it looks decent. And Dusty is an okay hero that I would read again. Next up is Swing Sisson, Ace of the Bandstand. And this is one of those real surprises that comes at you when you're reading a Golden Age story. Something that you think would be a terrible idea, because Swing Sisson is like the worst name you could possibly think of. You could combine swing with anything else that starts with S and come up with a better name than Sisson. Like Swing Stevens would be a really cool name for this character, but that's not what they came up with. And the concept is actually very interesting. So Swing is a guy that runs an orchestra, and he also fights crime. And there's members of his orchestra that have skills that help him in fighting crimes that he can call on. So he's sort of like a cross between Glenn Miller and Doc Savage. And if you had billed this like that to me, I would watch a TV show like that any day of the week. I would love the concept of this, but in execution, it's actually pretty lame. So the artwork isn't great. There's a character, she's burned with acid, but instead of drawing her face different, she's just colored different. And then so Swing doesn't call on a lot of his orchestra. He calls on one guy that's just as good in a fight as Swing is. And then he also does a falsetto that comes in handy later, because the two of them dress up in women's clothes so that they can get close enough to these extorters. And, I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem maybe with the fact that they don't fasten any of the clothes, so the clothes can just fall off as they're fighting. And how does that make them, how does that not mess up their fighting? You would think that their shirt coming open while they're swinging a punch would make it harder for them to win the fight. But no, it doesn't interfere with that at all. The point is to make sure that they're wearing men's clothes by the time they win the fight, because you can't win a fight in women's clothing. I think that's the point of this story. I'm not sure what the point of the story is, but it might be that. And so we'll move on from Swing. Great idea, terrible execution. We move on to Lollapalooza, a strip that what I've read of it so far, I've not really enjoyed. I think it's in someone else's hands at this point in 1941, and I think it's the better for it. There's two gags, one on each page here. The first one is actually kind of funny, and it tells us a lot. I keep clenching up my voice every time I get frustrated with one of these features, so I have to take a moment to pause. Okay, we're talking about Lollapalooza, and that gag was kind of funny, and it reminds us about how much it costs to get a coat, how much it costs to get a steak dinner, and how much it costs to have someone check your coat in a restaurant, and how hard it was in the 1930s to do all three, kind of like it is today, except for we don't check coats. And then the next page of Lollapalooza is a goofier gag. It requires you to believe that using a battering ram, two people can push someone through a brick wall. I think Herculo from Big Top would do a better job at that. And then we're going to move on to Reynolds of the Mounted. This is by, what is his name? Art Panagian, and you're going to hear a lot about him from me. I've repackaged and reprinted his artwork myself. Prolific member of the Iger Eisner studio, and you'll be hearing about him much more in my videos as well. Reynolds of the Mounted is on a train that's transporting war prisoners, because Canada is already at war, right? So that tracks. And then this one guy escapes, and Reynolds is trying to track him down. Then the bad guy gets into a car with this woman that takes him to an airfield, and it turns out that Reynolds is there, and they have this connection because they know the same person at the airfield. And that is actually kind of a good coincidence that works, because I mentioned already that I don't like coincidences that are stupid and only move the story forward in a 5-page feature. But if you come up with one that's kind of clever, I'll buy that and go along with it. And so far, I'm okay with this story. There's also this nice thing where Reynolds actually comes up with the idea of that makes the bad guy reveal himself. He's trying to sneak across the airfield in disguise, but Reynolds shouts that the bad guy's actually already been captured, and that makes the bad guy turn around and go, "What?" And that kind of reveals himself to everybody. And then unfortunately, Reynolds doesn't have the ability to win this fight at the end because the bad guy gets on a plane and Reynolds isn't a pilot. So that means that this other character that just appears for this one story is actually the one that gets into another plane and defeats the bad guy. So that's kind of a problem for Reynolds, and hopefully we're not going to talk about that any longer because that wasn't all that good a feature. We're going to move on to Captain Bruce Blackburn Counter Spy. And this one starts out kind of promising to me because the clue to solving an arson is a book of matches. And then he finds a second book of matches, and they're from the same company. So he calls the company, finds out where those matches were sold. And it turns out that they were sold to a company that has gone out of business, but then those matches were sold off to another business. And that's how he tracks them down. And that's all kind of interesting because you don't think about matches being something that changes hands that often. And that's as far as this story is interesting. There's this there's this hook to the character of Blackburn where he has a double that works with him, and that comes up once in the story in not an interesting at all way. And he doesn't even need to pull in the double to make this story work because he already has someone helping him on the case. He's this guy named, what was the name? The name was Girk. The guy's last name is Girk. I just had to read that because it's such a dumb last name. I can't believe they couldn't come up with something better than Girk. And Girk could have solved it for him. He didn't need to have the double there, but now he's there just so that Blackburn can kind of be present when some of the bad guys are defeated. And then Blackburn goes after the main bad guy, who he catches, and we find out that the arsons were set in a very unbelievable manner that was really easy to stop. Moving on. The Fargo Kid. So this is our Western. Every anthology has to have a Western. But the thing about Westerns is that you never know what time period you're in. Is this a modern day Western? Is it 1800s Western? And until like a car drives past and pulls you into the present, you don't know. In this case, it actually starts out really interesting for me because the Fargo Kid comes to what appears to be a haunted monastery. And there's this storm, and he comes in from the storm, and there's these spooky characters there. And you're thinking, oh, this is kind of like a gothic mystery setup. But then it isn't because the bad guys are actually enemy agents and they have a radio, and that pulls us fast into the present day. And they're working not for. They're, it turns out that they are not working for another government. They're working for like drug smugglers, which is kind of a letdown. And then the Fargo Kid does two things. Like he shakes off a drug that he was used to knock him out very quickly, and then he pulls his guns quickly and he shoots a bad guy. And other than that, it turns out that the police show up and they do most of the rest of it. And it's a good setup that doesn't go very far. And again, it's the page count that really hampers this. And that the Fargo Kid maybe isn't that interesting a character, but I haven't read any others of him. There's a 2-page text story. I'm not going to talk about the text stories a lot in my videos. They're just there so that the comic books get a better postal rate. And this story is really no exception. There's some research that went into this. We learn a lot about St. Elmo's fire. We learn a lot about Cambodia. Maybe, I don't know, it kind of sounds like someone read something and this wasn't all just made up off the top of someone's head, but maybe it was. And there's a lot of ants, and the ants may have ended a whole civilization. So that's a real history lesson there. If it's true, probably not. Probably not. Moving on, Mickey Finn. There's 4 pages of Mickey Finn reprints, and each one has a topper called Nippy. Nippy is terrible. I'm not going to talk about it. It's not funny at all. Mickey Finn is sometimes kind of funny. I've talked about Mickey Finn on my channel before. Don't remember which episode it was. Go back and look for it. And it's pretty much the same setup. So Uncle Phil does something dumb, or Uncle Phil is just the butt of the joke, and then Mickey might be present in that story, or maybe he's not. Maybe it's just Uncle Phil. So Uncle Phil wins a horse race in a twist that I actually like on the first one. That one's good. Then there's a second one about dressing up in drag. This is the second cross-dressing story in this issue, so interesting that I got this one. And then there's also a black person in the story that is poorly drawn. This is the second poorly drawn black character that we see in this racial stereotype, not counting the blacks that are just beaten up by Sama earlier. And then things get worse. There is a Mickey Finn story where Mickey Finn teaches a boy to beat up bullies, and that is the lesson that is imparted to us in the story, that when you're bullied, you get into fights and you punch them. Wow. I wonder if that is really what people thought in the 1930s, 1940s, or if that's just sloppy storytelling. Then we move on to Rusty Ryan, and this is by Paul Gustafson, who I've recently talked about in an episode. And Rusty Ryan is a boy, but he kind of dresses like Captain America, and all of his friends do too, except when they want to be undercover, and then they dress like the Blackhawks. And, well, that's a real mashup of characters right there. And the story begins with him being hit on the head with a pencil, which wouldn't normally lead into a story, but this pencil is actually hollow and filled with nitroglycerin. Now, how it failed to blow up Rusty is never explained, because he immediately throws it onto an airfield, and this is weird. So he doesn't just leave it where it was sitting, right? He picks it up and he throws it way over a fence and by a plane, so the plane blows up. Now, Rusty never gets in trouble for this. Like, he never had to do that. But that's how they learned that it was full of nitroglycerin, and that the people that threw that out of a car are bad guys. So Rusty breaks away from the police and leads them on a chase using a stolen motorcycle. And then the police manage to catch him after he's already defeated the bad guys. There is a trap involved that's kind of interesting, where the trap door opens onto a ravine. Now, how this building stands up when part of it is, like at least a corner of the building is hovering over a ravine, is kind of weird and doesn't make sense. But again, don't think too much about these stories. And then Rusty wins the day, and because of course he can, he's just a boy in a costume, but he's apparently the super cool fighting guy. He did have a wrench, and that helped win the day. Oh no, it wasn't a wrench, it was a lead pipe. With the lead pipe, it's like Clue. Rusty Ryan saves the day with a lead pipe in the weird house that can hang over a cliff. Homer Doodle and Son is the next gag feature, and it's not very good. And then Poison Ivy is actually a Herky clone. You never thought that Herky, I've talked about him before in an episode, you never thought that he was going to be the character that was going to be cloned, because it's not that great an idea. But yes, it was done, and we have proof of it right here. Then moving on, we get Spin Shaw. He's a pilot. He's not that interesting a pilot, so he's given a sidekick in this episode, and his sidekick is Eddie. Eddie isn't even interesting enough to be drawn the same between the first page and the last page. and that's interesting. And there's this weird thing where somehow the cockpit opens up over Eddie's seat while the plane's upside down. And I don't know how this happens, but it causes a little bit of drama there for Eddie. Spin, we never feel like Spin's in danger, but Eddie kind of is for that half page. And I guess this is Eddie's strip now. And that is the last feature. Then we get a Red Ryder ad at the back. And then it is a Red Ryder 2-pager of ads. And that's it. And that is my comic book. I've spent a lot of time looking at this. It's my second time reading through it, kind of. I was just glancing at it. I read it through it once, and I'm going to have to bag this up and probably never look at it again. Now, why am I so excited to own this still when my reviews of the stories were that most of them were terrible? This is history. This is part of the history of comic books that I can hold in my hand and know that this was on a newsstand next to better comic books in 1941, and now it is in my hands. And that makes me happy, and I think that if you owned a Golden Age comic book, that would make you happy too. It's not necessary to own a lot of them because um, the good ones are few and far between. And I'm going to talk about a lot more of the good ones in future episodes. This wasn't one of them. But at least it's mine, and I'm happy. So that is the takeaway for today's episode, and bye for now.